Hi, everybody. Tonight, we are going to begin a long, gentle descent into the shadows of ancient history. This is a story that stretches across the vast stone corridors of one of the world's most infamous amphitheaters, the Roman Colosseum. But instead of gladiators basking in glory or emperors draped in triumph, we will focus on something quieter, sadder, and more unsettling: the unfair matches. Battles not of strength versus strength, but of despair, domination, and design. These are the stories hidden between the grand spectacles, behind the roaring crowds, where uneven odds were not a glitch in the system, they were the system. Over the next 24 parts, we will uncover these silent tragedies, one at a time. So if you're lying in bed, maybe resting your head on a soft pillow, let the world fall away for a while. Let's begin. Our journey opens in the year 82 AD, when the Colosseum, known then as the Flavian Amphitheater, was still gleaming with the polish of newness. It had been completed only 2 years prior, a gift from the Emperor Titus to the people of Rome. A gift born not of generosity, but of necessity. Rome was trying to distract itself from fires, from famine, from war. The Colosseum was part of the plan: games, blood, and entertainment. But not all games were fair, and not all stories were told. Imagine, if you will, the soft crunch of sand under sandals, the smell of sweat, dust, and anticipation. The stands are packed, noble senators in marble-white togas, vendors shouting prices for honeyed dates, children squirming beside stern parents. Then the gates groan open. A young man, no older than 20, steps into the sun-drenched arena. His name is Cassian, and he was not a soldier, not a criminal. He was a librarian's assistant in a minor province in Hispania. His crime? A nobleman accused him of stealing a scroll. The scroll was never found. No trial, no appeal, just the Colosseum. For the people, his punishment was not unusual. For Cassian, it was everything. Cassian stood in a simple tunic, barefoot, holding a rusted dagger. Across from him, released with a dramatic flourish from a steel-barred gate, was a retiarius, a net fighter. But not just any retiarius. This was Valgus, one of the best. 10 years in the arena. Broad shoulders, quick hands. A killer's instincts. The crowd did not boo. They did not question the mismatch. They leaned forward in fascination, eager to see how long the boy would last. Some made bets, not if he would win, but how many seconds. Cassian trembled. The dagger in his hand might as well have been a twig. Valgus was already circling him, the weighted net swaying gently, waiting. What makes this story particularly haunting is not what happened next, though it was brutal and brief, but what we found in a faded, dusty archive centuries later. A fragment of a letter written by a scribe who witnessed the fight. He wrote, "The boy moved like a bird in the wind, fluttering, unsure. His eyes searched the stands as if begging the crowd to be his shield. When the net caught his legs, he did not cry out. He looked up, and his lips formed a question. Not a scream, a question, as though asking, why?" Valgus ended it quickly. A downward strike, the crowd erupted. Bread was tossed from baskets. Musicians played. The emperor nodded. But that was not entertainment. That was design. These unfair matches were not accidental. They were scheduled, deliberate, sometimes even marketed. They were about control, about spectacle, about keeping the people reminded of power, both divine and imperial. As the sun lowered that evening, and shadows lengthened across the sand, Cassian's body was quietly dragged away. No statue, no name engraved in stone, just a smear on the sand and a few crumbs of bread around where he died. But that's not the end of it. In the days after Cassian's fight, a rumor stirred in the lower districts. They said Valgus had not slept well, that he wandered the gladiator barracks at night looking for something, that he refused to train. Days passed. Then, just before the next games, Valgus requested to be matched against something he could lose to. The request puzzled the Lanista, the manager of the gladiators. It was rejected. But during the next games, Valgus walked into the arena and removed his armor, piece by piece. The crowd was confused. Then he refused to raise his weapon. His opponent, a Thracian fighter named Milo, hesitated. The crowd screamed for action, but Valgus only stood there. Milo struck him once, shallowly. Still, he stood. A second strike. Deeper. Still standing. Finally, Milo looked at the Emperor's box, a small nod, then a clean strike through the chest. Valgus died standing. They called it an accident, said his helmet had been faulty. But some whispered a different story. That guilt, that sorrow had broken something inside him. that perhaps he saw the ghost of Cassian each time he closed his eyes. That day the crowd was quieter, not silent, but subdued. Something in the air had shifted, if only for a while. And yet the games continued. The machine moved forward. Names forgotten, fates assigned. The Colosseum did not weep, but some of its stones, they say, grew warm when it rained, as though remembering. This was the first of many unfair matches, and tonight we've only just begun. In the weeks that followed Valgus's death, a strange stillness settled over the gladiator quarters. It was not spoken of directly, nothing ever was, but an unease slithered between the barracks like a low fog. New recruits eyed the blood-stained sands during training. Veteran fighters, usually quick to jest, now fell silent at dusk. Even the lanista, once bullish and gruff, paused longer than usual before reading match lists aloud. Something had shifted, but the games would not stop. They never did. Part 2 of our journey takes us away from Rome just briefly to the provinces, specifically to a port city in Mauritania on the northwestern coast of Africa. Here, a merchant vessel loaded with painted amphorae and salted fish docked beside an unremarkable crate. Inside that crate, shackled and blindfolded, was a man named Sargon. He had been a hunter, one of the finest of his people. He knew how to move through the brush without sound, how to kill a lion with a single well-placed spear, but his skills had brought him to the wrong attention. During a festival in a local village, Roman officers, amused and impressed by his performance, offered him coin to demonstrate his craft in their arena. He declined, firmly, respectfully. That night, his village was raided, not burned, not pillaged, just emptied. 10 young men and women taken, Sargon among them. By the time he arrived in Rome, Sargon had not spoken in days. He did not rage, did not beg. He simply waited, his breath slow and deliberate, like someone listening for something distant. He was sold to the Colosseum not as a gladiator, but as prey. You see, not all matches were between men. There was a particular class of spectacle known as the Venatianas, beast hunts. And while these often involved trained venators, beast fighters wielding spears and armed with strategy, sometimes the event planners wanted something more raw, more theatrical. They created elaborate backdrops inside the arena, mock forests, papier-mâché caves, even mechanical trees, and dropped in animals from far-off lands, lions, tigers, crocodiles, and among these, sometimes, a man. Sargon was one such man. The crowd was told he was a savage from the jungle. They cheered at the sight of his chains being unlocked. He wore nothing but a short loincloth, and he carried a wooden staff, smooth and light, no metal tip. Across from him, 2 starved leopards snarled behind a cage. The cage door creaked open. The crowd leaned in. What they expected, of course, was a short and brutal chase. The exotic man running, the leopards leaping, the staff shattering, and finally a roar of triumph as the predators fed. It had happened many times before. It would happen again, but not that day. Sargon did not run. He crouched low, muscles coiled, eyes never blinking. The leopards, confused by his stillness, slowed their charge. One crept forward, circling. The other stayed back. Sargon's breathing changed, soft, rhythmic. The crowd grew impatient, jeering. Then, in a sudden blur of motion, Sargon struck. He moved like a whip. The staff lashed out, not at the head, but at the legs, precise loud cracks that echoed through the arena. The first leopard stumbled, yelped, and limped. The second growled, charging. Sargon pivoted, slammed the staff upward into its jaw. It recoiled, dazed. The crowd went silent. This was not the narrative they had purchased. This was not the dance of death they craved. This was skill, intelligence, control. Sargon did not kill the animals. He did not need to. He outmaneuvered them, kept them at bay. For over 10 minutes, he moved like water around them, never striking a killing blow, but always keeping them just far enough away. The leopards, tired and wounded, eventually backed away, tails down, retreating to the gate from which they came. For the first time in recorded memory, the animals had chosen not to fight. The crowd, unsure whether to cheer or protest, broke into scattered applause. The emperor, Domitian at the time, tilted his head, amused. A gesture was made. The arena staff approached Sargon. He dropped the staff and allowed himself to be led out, still not a word spoken. Later that evening in the gladiator barracks, the others stared as he passed, not in mockery, in awe. There was something unshakable about him, something untouched. But the Colosseum does not reward defiance. The following morning, the match lists were posted. Sargon's name appeared again, this time not against beasts. He was to face 6 opponents, 6 trained gladiators, all armed, all armored, each one with a reputation for blood. There was no mention of why, no public reasoning, no shift in the schedule, but everyone understood. Sargon had humiliated the narrative. He had upset the delicate illusion that the Colosseum was not merely about survival, but submission. And so the next match was not about entertainment, it was about restoration. Sargon walked into the arena, hands unshackled, no staff, no weapons. The crowd cheered. They had forgiven the previous day's disappointment. This was the correction. This was justice. But justice, like so many things in Rome, was a matter of perspective. The 6 fighters approached, 2 from the front, 2 from the sides, 2 from behind. And Sargon ran, not like a coward, like a hunter. He moved with deliberate angles, ducking under strikes, leaping between them, stealing a gladius from one with a brutal twist of the wrist. He did not survive. That was never possible, but he did not die quickly, and he did not die quietly. By the time the final blow fell, 3 of the 6 were dead. The crowd was in chaos, some screaming, some laughing, some stunned into silence. The emperor stood, his face unreadable. That night, the Colosseum floor was washed more thoroughly than usual, and in the darkness of the barracks, one of the younger recruits whispered Sargon's name like a prayer. No statue was ever made, but somewhere beneath those ancient stones, his story lingers. And so, the games went on. The morning fog hung low over the Tiber, thick enough to quiet the bustle of carts on the Via Appia. In a corner of the Colosseum's sprawling shadow, beneath a modest archway used more for the movement of animals and refuse than people, an unmarked wagon arrived. Drawn by 2 tired oxen, it carried a single passenger, hidden under layers of wool, chained at the ankles but upright. Her name was Daciana. She was not from any Roman province. Her accent was sharp and heavy, her skin pale as marble, with strands of silver threaded through her raven-black hair, though she was no older than 30. She came from the mountains north of Thrace, a region so distant and indifferent to Roman maps that even the procurator simply marked it as ultra-fines, beyond the borders. And yet here she was, not a prisoner of war, not a criminal, not even a slave. Daciana had been bartered, traded, it was said, by a minor provincial governor as a gift to the emperor. Not for her beauty, not for pleasure, but because of a story, a strange tale that had filtered down from the forests of her homeland, that she was cursed, that she had never been wounded, that her village elders believed she could not be killed. Rome, ever hungry for novelty, did not need convincing. That week's games were already filled with names. A celebrity from Numidia, a group of condemned pirates from the Adriatic, a rare duel between 2 Demachairi, swordsmen wielding twin blades. But when the name Daciana was added to the roster, the scribes noted a curious instruction in the margins. It read only, "She must bleed. No context, no strategy, no expectations of survival, just a demand." And so, in the 5th hour of that Friday's spectacle, the drums beat low and the arena gates opened again. The crowd hushed. Out walked Daciana, barefoot, draped in a tattered linen robe. Her hair was braided down her back in a style no Roman had ever seen. Her eyes scanned the crowd, not in fear, but with a distant sadness, as though she were searching for something that wasn't there. She carried no weapon. Across from her, emerging with a flourish of banners and cheers, was a popular figure among the crowd. Calvus the Strong, a man of enormous stature, arms like amphorae, beard braided with bronze rings. His record, 21 victories, never defeated. Known for dispatching opponents in under 2 minutes. He wore the full armor of a murmillo, helmet crested, greaves polished, shield wide, sword sharp. Daciana bowed, the signal was given. Calvus advanced, his footsteps thunderous against the packed earth. Daciana stood still. He raised his shield, prepared for a counterstrike that never came. He swung low, wide, and meant to intimidate. She ducked, no flourish, just enough movement. Then she stepped back, the crowd chuckled. Calvus pressed again, this time with force. A real swing, aimed high, she twisted. The blade caught her robe, tearing the fabric but missing flesh. Still no retaliation. Then a murmur moved through the audience. A line, like a breath, rippling across the front rows. Daciana was singing, not loudly, not theatrically, a soft chant, repetitive, not in Latin, not in Greek. The words unfamiliar, lilting like a lullaby meant for trees or snow or wolves. Calvus faltered, only for a second. Then he charged. She didn't run. She stepped into his motion, too close for his blade to swing cleanly. Her hands, thin, scarred, grabbed the edge of his helmet and twisted. He stumbled. She moved again, sidestepping, whispering the chant louder now. From the stands, it was unclear whether the blows were missing by luck or by design. Calvus became reckless. He swung again. This time he clipped her shoulder. The fabric tore, but there was no blood, not a drop. The crowd stirred again. Even the Emperor, watching from his shaded balcony, leaned forward. Calvus roared. He charged a third time, and this time his blade struck across her back. The impact was audible. The robe split. Still, no blood. Her skin bore long scars, old ones, thick and tangled, but they did not open. No fresh wound, no reaction. Panic set in, not among the crowd, but in Calvus's eyes. He dropped his shield and gripped his gladius with both hands, bringing it down like a butcher. Dashana stepped to the side, and the blade embedded itself in the sand. She touched his helmet once, gently, as though anointing him, then stepped away. He collapsed. He did not die, but he did not rise. The match was called. No victor announced. The arena remained hushed, uncertain. Whispers passed like lightning between seats. Was it sorcery, trickery, divine protection? Even the scribes didn't know what to record. Later, in the underground cells, Dashana was questioned. She said nothing. She ate little. She slept only an hour each night, always with her back to the wall. 3 nights after her match, she vanished. No record of release, no execution, no transfer. The guards reported nothing unusual. One swore he heard her chant echoing in the corridor, hours after her cell had been found empty. Another claimed his lantern went out as he passed her door, and when it relit, her chains were coiled neatly on the bench, untouched. The Colosseum never acknowledged it. But from that day on, a strange caution fell over the game schedulers. Women were still sent into the arena, but never again alone, never again without weapons, and never again did anyone try to make someone bleed just to prove they could. They say, if you stand near the old walls during a cold morning, when the wind carries from the north, you can still hear the rhythm of her chant. A lullaby in a language no longer spoken. It does not ask for victory, only remembrance. Beneath the Colosseum, down a long corridor slick with moisture and silence, was a chamber few dared to linger in. It was not part of the main prison. It wasn't where the gladiators trained or where the animals were held. It was quieter, deeper, known to the slaves who cleaned the floors and carried the bodies only as the hollow room. There, in the dim flicker of oil lamps, Rome kept its most unusual prisoners. Not the dangerous ones, the confusing ones, the ones who made senators whisper and priests clutch their amulets. It was in that chamber that a boy named Faustus awoke one day, his wrists bound by twine instead of iron, his clothes intact and his face clean. He was 15, small with wiry arms and a mop of dark curls that half covered his eyes. He did not weep, he did not speak. When the guards asked his name, he offered none. When they pressed, he whispered only, "They told me I was the gift." The guards assumed he was mad, but someone higher up had written his name on the match list, and once a name was written, the schedule marched on. Faustus was not trained, not armed, not even properly introduced. When his match was announced on the morning of the summer solstice, the crowd expected another condemned thief or traitor to be offered up as amusement. What they saw instead was a boy. The gasp that rippled through the audience was genuine. Even the vendors fell silent. Faustus stepped into the arena barefoot, his tunic tied with a simple rope. He blinked against the sunlight, squinting toward the emperor's box as if looking for something familiar. Then he walked to the center and sat cross-legged in the sand. The crowd murmured, then laughed. It was then that the second gate opened, and what emerged silenced them again. It was a man called Merox, not a gladiator by training, but a professional executioner from Gaul, brought in not for skill but for cruelty. He was enormous, with broad scars across his chest and back, and a face ruined by fire years before. His weapon was a wide, brutal axe, chipped and rusted at the edges, not for show, but for effect. Merox was promised a feast in silver for the performance. He did not care who the opponent was. He stepped forward, dragging the axe behind him. Faustus did not move. The boy simply raised one hand, palm open, fingers spread, and said a single word. Not Latin, not Greek, a name maybe, or a plea. The wind, which had been absent, shifted. Dust swirled across the floor of the arena in a spiral. The sunlight dimmed just slightly as though a cloud had passed over. Some in the audience shifted uncomfortably, others scoffed. Murrox raised his axe. The boy did not flinch. The strike came down, fast and final. But before it landed, something happened. A crack, not of bone but of air itself, rang out. Not loud, just sharp. Murrox stumbled. His hands opened involuntarily. The axe dropped to the sand. He fell to one knee, choking. Not from a wound, from breathlessness. He clutched his throat, his eyes bulged. A thin trail of blood emerged from one nostril. The boy had not moved, he simply stared at him. Within seconds, Murrox collapsed. The arena was silent. No one understood what had happened. Faustus stood. His tunic now clung to him as though wet, though no water had touched him. He looked at the Emperor again, raised that same hand, then turned and walked toward the gate from which he'd come. No guard stopped him. They couldn't. Not one dared touch him. The following morning, every official record of the match had been altered. Not erased, Rome never erased, but changed. The match was listed as a reversal. No names mentioned. Just the phrase, outcome unanticipated, audience unsettled, performer dismissed. Faustus was never seen again. But in the years after, several strange occurrences began to surface. Gladiators who saw him in dreams. Priests who claimed their relics trembled when they passed the hollow room. Scribbled warnings in forgotten ledgers. Do not use children. The arena does not want them. And one record, never meant to be seen by public eyes, marked in the private scrolls of a senator named Vespillo, read, "There was no blood, no touch, only presence. I felt a hand on my shoulder that day, though none stood near me." The emperor smiled, but his cup fell from his hand. "I will not attend the games for some time." The Colosseum had consumed many. It reveled in combat, spectacle, imbalance. But something about Faustus had unsettled its hunger. No chants were sung in his name, no statues raised. But under the stones, some believed his steps still echoed, not as an echo of death, but as a refusal. A boy who refused to be a victim and left the arena untouched. The summer rains had passed, leaving behind a Rome thick with scent. Olive oil, damp stone, the faint sweetness of crushed grapes from carts passing through the forum. The Colosseum, now more than 2 decades old, stood like a god of its own, unmoved by weather or season. Crowds returned daily. Their sandals pressed the same steps worn by tens of thousands before them. Each day brought matches, grand and small, blood and silence. But the next tale does not begin on the arena floor. It begins in the audience. Among the patricians and merchants, beneath a gilded awning meant to shield from sun, sat a woman named Aelia. She was draped in fine linen, her eyes rimmed in kohl, fingers adorned with rings not for power, but for memory, each one a gift from someone now dead. She rarely spoke. She rarely blinked. Those who sat beside her claimed they could feel her watching, even when she turned away. Aelia was not a senator's wife, nor a priestess, nor an artist of repute. She was something rarer, a widow of war. Her husband, Decimus Valerius, had been a commander stationed in Britannia. He died not in battle but by the order of Rome itself, accused of treason, convicted without trial, fed to wolves as a symbol of loyalty reasserted. Aelia had not spoken a word since his death. Instead, she bought a villa near the Colosseum, attended every major match, never missed a week, sat always in the same seat, eyes fixed on the sands. Whispers rose quickly around her. Some said she was mad. Others claimed she searched for omens or for his spirit, but most assumed it was grief, polished smooth and cold over time, like a river stone. And then one day, she stood. It was during a match. 2 gladiators were fighting, one a secutor, slow and armored, the other a nimble Thraex with a curved blade. As the Thraex struck the final blow, clean and brutal, Aelia rose from her seat. The gesture itself was jarring. In 25 months, she had never moved. She lifted a hand and pointed, not at the victor, at the editor, the official who declared winners and ordered mercy or death. The man blinked, confused. She turned and walked out. The following morning, a courier arrived at the Ludus Magnus, the largest gladiator training school in the city. He carried with him a sealed scroll bearing the imperial sigil and Aelia's personal mark, a circle enclosed by thorns. Inside was an offer, not for entertainment, for a match. Aelia wished to sponsor a private combat. No spectators, no musicians, no vendors, just silence. And she would choose the fighters. The Lanista laughed when he read it. But when he brought it to the arena's magistrate, the laugh died in his throat. The scroll bore the Emperor's counter signature. Permission had been granted. No one knew why. The fighters she chose were unremarkable on paper. One named Pulcher was a recent recruit, a deserter from the Roman Navy, caught in Sicilia and sentenced to die. He had no victories. He barely understood the rules. The other was Tiber, a former soldier, lean and sharp-eyed, convicted of striking a superior during a failed campaign in Dacia. The two were not friends, not rivals, just names. On the day of the match, the arena was empty. Not even the Emperor watched. Only Aelia. She stood alone at the edge of the upper tier, veiled in black. The arena floor was quiet. The usual pageantry, trumpets, fanfare, cheering was absent. Only the caw of distant crows echoed above. The match began. Pulcher moved first, awkwardly, his grip on the gladius unsteady. Tiber advanced slowly, testing the ground with each step. There was no shouting, no taunts, just the sound of sand shifting beneath their feet. Aelia did not blink. The fight was clumsy at first. Pulcher was stronger but slower. Tiber was cautious, his blade flicking like a tongue. Blood came slowly, and not from dramatic wounds, but from tired gashes, shoulders, thighs, forearms. They bled together, stumbled apart, came back. Then, near the end, Pulcher hesitated. He stepped back, chest heaving, and dropped his weapon. Tiber raised his. The final strike hovered, waiting. But Aelia raised her hand, palm forward, still, like a statue. Tiber froze. The gesture was unmistakable. It was not a plea for mercy. It was a command. And then he lowered the blade. The match was declared unfinished. Both men were spared, taken back underground. The arena staff stood dumbfounded, but no one challenged her. No one ever would. Over the next year, Aelia sponsored 4 more private matches. All strange, all silent. Each time she chose fighters who had no chance of glory. Men forgotten, fated to die. Each time she watched alone. Each time, one of them lived, but never both, and never the one the crowd would have chosen. Her choices seemed random, but they weren't. The 5th match was the first to draw the attention of the Emperor. A veteran of Germania, muscled, victorious, adored, was matched against a crippled man with a limp, a former scribe accused of forgery. The veteran struck first, confident. Then something unexpected happened. The scribe spoke, a name. No one heard it clearly. But the veteran stepped back, then dropped to his knees, refused to fight, surrendered. The match ended without a wound. When questioned later, the veteran refused to speak. The scribe was released. He left the city that night and was never seen again. After that, Aelia vanished. Her villa was empty, her name removed from the rosters. But in the Colosseum's lower records, hidden beneath layers of dust and bureaucracy, a brief line survives. 6 matches, 5 spared, 1 vanished, all chosen by her. No coin requested. Motive unknown. But some believe Aelia was never seeking vengeance. She was writing a eulogy, not with words, but with blood that wasn't spilled. Autumn arrived in Rome with a quiet sigh. The leaves of the Palatine Hill curled inward, gold bleeding into brown, while the Tiber thickened with fallen branches and memories. The Colosseum, meanwhile, stood untouched by the season. Its stones bore no change. Its breath was the same, warm with blood, cold with judgment. But on one particular afternoon, as the sun slid sideways through the arches, a whisper made its way down the marble corridors and stone tunnels. A name, Felix. A name as common as bread in Rome, and yet this one traveled with a different kind of weight. Felix had no past, at least not one that the scribes could verify. His arrival had not been marked by procession, sentence, or sale. One morning, the guards simply found him sitting cross-legged outside the Ludus Dacicus, the gladiator school reserved for elite fighters, often those who had fought in wars or were favored by emperors. He wore plain wool, dusty at the knees. His hair was shaved close, his eyes quiet. When asked who he was, he said only, "A shadow owed a debt." The lanista, annoyed and amused, ordered him beaten and thrown out. But by the following dawn, Felix was back. This time, he carried a wooden gladius. It was a training weapon, blunt, cracked, and often given to children or trainees. Where he found it, no one knew. But he placed it at the school's threshold, knelt and waited again. By the 3rd morning, he was led inside, not because they believed him, because they wanted to break him. What followed was not the usual path. Felix did not eat with the others, he did not speak, he did not train in formation, but he survived every drill, every blow, every accidental injury. He fought like someone who had forgotten what fear felt like. And yet, never with anger, only with stillness, every move precise, small, surgical. He was quiet, always, but never passive. The trainers began to notice. When a match partner overreached, Felix disarmed him gently, as though it were a lesson. When his shoulder was cut, he did not flinch. He never begged, nor shouted, nor celebrated. The other gladiators called him Il Silencioso, the silent one. His first public match was scheduled for a quiet afternoon, a midweek exhibition, nothing special, a warm-up for a greater event later that evening. The crowd was only half full. The musicians played lazily. Vendors moved slowly between rows. Most people weren't even watching when the gate opened. Felix entered carrying the same wooden gladius. A murmur rose. This was no mistake. Someone had allowed him to enter with a training weapon. Across from him was Lavico, a seasoned fighter, tall and brutal, who preferred breaking legs before delivering the final blow. He laughed when he saw the wooden sword. "Are you here to spar or die?" he shouted. Felix did not answer. The match began. Lavico charged. Felix sidestepped. One step, no flourish. The wooden gladius struck once, low near the thigh. Lavico stumbled. He laughed again, raised his blade. Felix moved again. The sword spun in his hand once, then tapped the elbow. Lavico roared, swinging wide, and again the wooden sword struck. Not deep, not loud, but true. Lavico's sword dropped. The crowd began to notice. Felix circled, never rushing. Lavico, red with rage, bared his teeth and lunged. Felix struck once, at the temple. The wooden blade cracked. Lavico fell, not dead, not even unconscious, but completely still. He did not rise. The emperor, absent that day, later asked for a transcript. It read, "Combat concluded without kill, opponent incapacitated, unarmed man victorious." The silence in the stands had lasted longer than the match itself. Over the weeks that followed, Felix fought 6 more times, always with the wooden gladius, always against real weapons, always winning. The people began to talk. Some called him blessed, others cursed. Rumors whispered that he had once been an assassin for the Senate, trained in secret, erased from records. Others said he was a ghost, the soul of a gladiator who had never been allowed peace. And then one day, he was gone. No death, no release, no transfer. His cell was found empty. The wooden gladius left on the cot, splintered at the hilt, wrapped in linen. A message was stitched into the cloth with coarse black thread. Not all battles ask for blood. Some ask for balance. The Colosseum tried to forget him, but the sand didn't. Years later, when another fighter, young, brash, and eager to entertain, entered the arena with a wooden sword as a joke, the match ended before it began. He was struck down instantly, not by his opponent, by something unseen. His body convulsed, his eyes wide with terror. He survived, but he never fought again. He spoke only one phrase for the rest of his life. He was watching. The others never asked who. They already knew. It was the beginning of a long winter, when the winds from the Alps began to scratch their way down the Italian peninsula, settling like ghosts across the tiled roofs of Rome. Fires burned longer, the markets closed earlier, and the breath of the people turned white. But within the Colosseum, the cold never slowed the rhythm. The games continued. The sand stayed red, and the gods, if they watched, remained silent. In this chapter, we descend further, not in time, but in structure. Beneath the arena floor existed a world hidden from the public gaze, the hypogeum, a lattice of tunnels, chambers, lifts, and cages. Here, animals waited in darkness. Gladiators were prepped, whispered to, and sometimes mourned. It was a place of anticipation and fear. But there was one part of the hypogeum sealed tighter than the rest. A circular room lined with brick and iron, always damp, always shadowed. It was called lull. No one knew where the name came from. Some thought it had to do with the moon-shaped etchings carved along the ceiling. Others believed it referred to something older, something lost. But what they did know, what every guard, trainer, and lanista understood, was that those who entered Lunaris did not always return. It was in Lunaris that the twins were kept. They had no names, at least not any that remained. No citizenship, no records, just a file bound in goatskin held in the vaults of the Colosseum. Subjects acquired via unknown channels. Dismissal of previous handlers noted, presenting symmetrical anomalies. The twins were brought into the Colosseum not as fighters, but as curiosities. They were identical in every visible way. Hair, gait, voice, mannerism. Each movement of one was mirrored by the other. But it wasn't just appearance, it was instinct. They never spoke separately. They never ate unless seated together. They did not sleep unless they lay side by side. And when one was wounded, the other flinched. At first, the trainers tried to break them apart, isolate them, test their limits, but every attempt failed. One refused to move, the other refused to eat. Together, they were eerily still. Apart, they unraveled. So the decision was made, let them fight together. Their first match was scheduled quietly, slipped between two more anticipated events. No posters, no fanfare, a last-minute substitution to fill time. The crowd, unaware of what they would see, barely looked up when the gate opened. The twins stepped out in perfect unison. No armor, no helmets, just short tunics and matching short blades, gladii sharpened on the same whetstone. Across from them stood a Thracian and a heavily armed Retiarius, both experienced and confident. The signal was given. What followed was not a fight. It was choreography. The twins moved like reflections on water. One advanced as the other flanked. One ducked as the other struck. The crowd, used to chaos and surprise, grew silent. This was not a spectacle. It was a pattern. A performance written by bodies, not minds. The Thracian fell first, blade through the ribs. The Retiarius panicked, his net snagging one of the twins for a moment. Just a moment. But the other stepped forward and delivered a clean slice across his neck. The crowd erupted. They had never seen such synchronicity. No wasted motion, no shouting. Just two figures moving in mirrored calm, painting death in harmony. The twins were declared victors, but they did not raise their blades. They did not bow. They simply walked back through the gate, side by side. What made their story unusual was what happened after. They did not fight again for nearly 6 months. Each time their names were listed, they were scratched out, sometimes by decree, sometimes without reason. It was as if the Colosseum itself resisted using them too often. There were rumors that senators had argued about them, that priests were divided, some called them divine, others an abomination. That one night a whisper had been heard through the tunnels, only in pairs, never alone. Eventually, they fought again, but something had changed. The match was set against 4 opponents, 2 Gauls and 2 former legionaries. The twins moved as before, precise, fluid. But one of them, just one, was grazed by a spear. The wound was minor, a clean line across the arm. Still the other fell, not from a blow. He dropped as though the wound had struck him instead. The match stopped. The opponents froze. The remaining twins screamed, a sound so sharp, so raw, it cut through the amphitheater like a blade. Then he attacked. No rhythm, no beauty, only fury. It was over quickly. The opponents dead. But the twin who had fallen did not rise. He was not dead. Not yet. He was breathing, shallow and strange, as if whatever bond they shared had reversed. One bled on the outside, the other within. For 3 days they lay together in Lunaris. The one who bled never closed his eyes. The one who screamed never spoke again. Then, on the 4th morning, they were gone. No guard saw them leave. Their cell was locked. But on the wall carved by hand was a circle bisected by a single line. The moon, perhaps, or a reflection, cut in 2. The arena did not list them as dead, only absent. The following year, a new policy was quietly instated. All matched fighters to be of distinct origin. No siblings, no twins, no mirrors. And from that day on, if 2 fighters ever looked too similar, too alike, the crowd would murmur uneasily. The memory remained, not of their names, but of how they moved. The moon that night was high and pale, its light catching the edges of terracotta rooftops and silvering the surface of the Tiber. Rome slept lightly, as it always did when the winds blew from the east, carrying with them a strange tension, invisible and unnamed. In the dark, the Colosseum loomed with quiet breath, its arches like eyes, always watching. But below, deep in the maze of quarters and holding pens, someone else was watching too. His name was Hyros. He came not from any Roman province, nor from among the enslaved, condemned, or conquered. He arrived as part of an imperial gift, a diplomatic token from a small, defiant kingdom nestled in the deserts beyond the eastern borders of Judea. A king, seeking favor and fearing conquest, had sent Rome his most peculiar offering, a warrior who had never lost and never spoken. Hyros stood taller than most men, his body marked not with scars, but with intricate tattoos that curled and looped around his arms, his throat, even beneath his eyes, symbols of a language no Roman scribe could identify. When he was brought in, shackled and blindfolded, he bowed not to the emperor, not to the guards, but to the sun. a gesture done slowly, reverently, each time dawn broke. He refused to speak, he refused to eat for 3 days. On the fourth, he whispered a single phrase to the man who brought his food. Just 4 words, in a language thick with sand and age. When asked what it meant, the man only said, voice hushed. He fights once, and that seemed to be all. No one challenged the phrase. No one dared to ask more. So the editors, confused but intrigued, arranged a match. Hyros was scheduled to fight during the Saturnalia Games, days of wild celebration when rules were loosened, slaves permitted momentary liberties, and the Colosseum burned bright with activity from dawn to dusk. Spectacles were larger, matches bloodier, audiences drunker. But something strange happened that morning. As the crowds filed in, chattering and laughing, the sky began to darken. Clouds, thick and sudden, rolled in without wind. The air grew still. Birds that usually circled above the arena vanished. And then the gate opened. Hyros stepped out alone, no armor, only the patterned cloth from his homeland wrapped tight around his waist. His hands were bare, no blade. Across from him, the Colosseum had prepared a triumph, a display, a stacked match, 5 opponents, all armed. One wielded a spear, one a chain with iron weights. The others carried standard blades, short, gleaming, cruel. The crowd cheered, expecting spectacle. The trumpet sounded, and then nothing. Hyros did not move. He stood, eyes half-lidded, breathing slow. The 5 spread out, forming a crescent around him. The man with the chain moved first. He swung wide, the iron whistling as it sliced through air. Hyros blinked once. The chain struck, or tried to. It never landed. Hyros stepped into the swing, not away from it, into it, his hand catching the chain mid-air. With a twist of his wrist, it coiled around his forearm. He pulled. The wielder stumbled. A kick to the chest, sharp and low, sent him sprawling. The crowd gasped. But the real fear came a moment later. Hyros had not struck to kill. But the man did not rise. His chest did not rise. He was dead. The others attacked together. Hyros did not run, did not roar. He moved. A motion like water finding the slope. He ducked one blade, struck the knee, stepped left, cracked a jaw, pivoted, and with an open palm shattered the collarbone of the third. Each move deliberate, none wasted. When the 4th opponent raised his spear, Hyros caught it at the base, turned it inward, and drove it into the man's own shoulder. Not fatally, but enough. The 5th, blade trembling, dropped his weapon, fell to his knees. Hyros stood over him. The arena was silent. No applause, no command, no decision. Hyros turned, walked to the edge of the arena and raised his arms, not in triumph, in farewell. Then he looked upward and spoke. A single sentence, quiet but clear, in a language none could understand. Then he collapsed. No wound, no visible harm, but his heart had stopped. The physician could not explain it. His body bore no poison, no rupture, nothing. He was buried outside the city in a grave without a name. But the Colosseum kept the cloth he wore. It hung for a time on the wall near the underground holding chambers, a reminder perhaps or a warning. Later, the guard who had first spoken with Hyros confessed the secret. The phrase Hyros had whispered, "He fights once," was not about permission. It was prophecy. His gift was never survival. It was finality. He was a man who walked into the Colosseum not to win, but to end something. What no one ever knew. But for the rest of that winter, no matches were held at dusk. The editors claimed it was due to weather. But those who worked the stones and swept the blood told a different story. That at sunset, a shadow sometimes appeared at the edge of the arena. Tall, still, watching, waiting for his one match to end. The dawn after Saturnalia arrived muted, as though the city itself were hesitant to speak. Rome stirred slowly beneath a lavender sky, its streets drowsy with the residue of indulgence. Broken amphorae littered the alleys. The scent of roasted meat and spilled wine hung in the air. But inside the Colosseum, the ground was already swept, the blood rinsed from the sand, and the next list of matches prepared. No day was left blank. But among the names written that morning, one stood apart, not by rank or reputation, but by erasure. Her name had been scratched into the parchment, then scratched out, then written again. Varia. The name lingered like a question, a riddle that refused answer. Varia had been a scribe once, not a fighter, not even a criminal. Her position was minor, recording supply movements, schedules, grain deliveries to the nearby castra. She worked silently, head low, quill in hand, and rarely spoke above a whisper. Those who remembered her said she was sharp, but soft, not fierce, not defiant. But then came the audit, an investigation into the misplacement of coin, small sums, barely noticeable, but embarrassing for the wrong men. Varia was named, not for guilt, but for convenience. There was no trial, only a signature. She was sentenced to death, but not by blade or rope, by match. Her execution would be dressed as sport, an unarmed woman in the arena, one of Rome's darker customs, used when shame was to be masked with celebration. When Varia was escorted into the hypogeum, she said nothing. Not when the guards bound her hands, not when they cut her hair, not even when she was shown the gate through which she would die. Only once did she speak, to the old woman who cleaned the corridors. As the cleaner passed with a pail of water, Varia looked up and said, "My father told me that fear and silence are siblings, but only one survives." Then she entered the arena. She wore no armor, no shoes, just a plain shift of rough linen, stained at the hem. Across from her stood a Democharis, twin-bladed, skilled and showy. His name was Hadron. The crowd loved him. He was quick with a smile and quicker with his blades. He'd killed 18 before her. He expected to kill again. The signal was given. Varia did not run. She turned slightly, barefoot toes brushing the sand, and faced the Emperor's box. She raised one hand, not in defense, not in prayer, but in refusal. A stillness spread through the stands. Hadron paused, then stepped forward. He twirled one blade, feinting left, then right. Varia did not move. Hadron lunged. A shallow cut across her arm, intentional, meant to draw first blood and entertain. But she did not flinch. The blood ran, but she did not step back. She looked at it as though watching ink spread across parchment. Hadron grinned, pleased with his performance. He twirled again, slicing down. Varia stepped into him. It wasn't an attack, it was closeness. She pressed her forehead to his shoulder, and in that instant, somehow he faltered. The second blade never landed. His knees buckled. He dropped. The arena fell silent. The physicians claimed it was a seizure, but Hadron lived. He was dragged from the arena gasping, weeping, speaking nonsense about a mirror behind her eyes. The crowd did not know whether to cheer. Varia remained standing, blood on her arm, her hands still raised. The editor did not call for her death. He could not. No one could. She had survived, and by law, twisted, cruel law, she was now a victor. That night, Varia was moved to the victor's quarters. Gladiators whispered her name, half in fear, half in reverence. She did not speak. She spent each morning tracing lines in the sand with her fingers, patterns, symbols, some known, some foreign. She fought only twice more. Each time, unarmed. Each time, the opponent fell without understanding why. Not from wounds, from something else. A collapse of will, a fracture of certainty. On the evening of her third match, a guard entered her cell to escort her. It was empty. No sign of struggle, no sign of escape. Only a single phrase scratched into the stone with what appeared to be a fingernail. One cannot lose a fight that does not exist. The Colosseum did not list her as dead, nor freed, only withheld. And in later years, whenever a new scribe arrived, usually a quiet one with ink-stained hands and steady eyes, the veterans would pause, just for a second, and ask if they'd heard of Varia. Some had, some hadn't, but all remembered the image, a woman in the arena, alone, bleeding, undefended and undefeated. The rain came in sheets the night before, drumming across the rooftops like thousands of soft fists. By morning, the sky had cleared, but the air held that unmistakable weight, thick with damp stone and the smell of iron. The kind of morning where breath clings to your chest and the silence beneath the streets feels deeper than usual. That morning, a delivery cart entered through the Colosseum's east gate. It bore no seal, no inscription, only a flat wooden box, long and narrow, wrapped in waxed cloth. Two guards lifted it, expecting it to be a shipment of weapons, perhaps a donation from some distant governor eager to curry favor with the games. Instead, when they unwrapped it, they found something else entirely, a coffin, or something like one, carved from olive wood, fastened with simple leather bands. The lid slid free with a soft sigh. Inside was a man, or the shell of one. He was not dead, but he did not stir. He was pale, too pale for someone alive, and his body bore no scars, no marks of torture, no bruising at all, only a deep sun-shaped brand across the center of his chest, so dark it seemed burned into the very bone. A tag was tied to his wrist. It read one word, Orcus. The guards summoned the arena master, then the magistrate. Then, uncertain what to do with a man delivered like a message, they summoned the emperor's own physician. Orcus, they learned, had a heartbeat. Slow, even, but he did not wake. For 2 days he remained in that state, unmoving, eyes closed, breath shallow. And then, on the 3rd night, just after the oil lamps were extinguished, he opened his eyes. No gasp, no scream, just a slow, steady inhale. By morning, he was seated upright on the edge of his cot. When asked who he was, he replied, "I was sent." When asked who had sent him, he replied, "The ones who remember." That was all. The Colosseum officials, unsettled but intrigued, scheduled him for the next open match. It was a light event, meant for morning amusement. Spectators drank watered wine, picked dates from wooden bowls, laughed and talked as if the arena were a garden. Orcus entered without ceremony. No armor, no weapon. He wore a tunic of dark cloth, and the sun-shaped brand on his chest was visible even from the upper tiers. Across from him was a standard opponent, a young Gaul named Trebonius, well-trained, eager to please. This was to be his 5th match. The odds favored him. The trumpet sounded. Trebonius charged. Orcus did not move. The sword slashed diagonally, perfect form, textbook arc. It stopped an inch from Orcus's neck. Not from mercy, from paralysis. Trebonius's entire body went rigid. The sword trembled in his hand. He dropped it, took a step back, then dropped to his knees. No wound, no pain, only fear. Tears streamed down his face. He muttered something over and over. The scribes couldn't quite catch it. Later, when interviewed, he claimed he had seen a field of bones in Orcus's eyes. Orcus knelt beside him, placed a hand on his head, and said, "Not you," then stood, turned to the emperor's box, and bowed. He was not declared a victor, but the crowd applauded. It was confusion more than admiration. But the applause came all the same. The match was never officially recorded, only a single line written in the arena logs. Combat not engaged. Spectator effect observed. Subject exempt from rotation until further notice. Still, whispers began to spread. That Orcus had returned. Returned from where? None knew. But some older members of the staff, those who had been there for decades, recalled another name. Not a man. A legend. A figure from the earliest days of the games, long before the Colosseum had even been completed. A man who had once been condemned, not to die, but to wait, to remain alive between matches, to be kept in silence as a symbol, not punishment, not reward, just remembrance. That figure, they said, had been branded with the same mark, a sun, surrounded by spokes, a wheel without motion. They said it represented the place beneath the gods, deeper than the underworld, where the forgotten were held. They said it was called Orcus. After that day, strange things began to happen. Animals meant for matches refused to exit their cages when Orcus stood near. Veteran gladiators requested to be removed from any list bearing his name. One even tried to bribe a lanista to be reassigned to the mines instead. And always, Orcus moved the same way, slow, deliberate, like a man walking through water no one else could see. He fought only 3 times, never struck a blow. But each opponent left the arena changed. Some spoke in riddles for days after. Others took vows of silence. One wandered the city until he was found days later at the gates of a temple, claiming he had seen the face of time. Eventually, Orcus vanished, not escaped, not released, just gone. His chamber was empty, no signs of struggle, no notes, no letters, no body. The only evidence he had ever been there was the brand burned into the straw mat where he once sat. The straw did not catch fire, but it smoked gently for hours. Those who saw it said the room smelled not of burning, but of dust, old dust, as if something had been waiting there for a very long time and had finally moved on. The mornings in Rome could be deceptive. The sunlight spilled gently across the cobbled streets, bathing marble columns in gold. Birds sang in the fig trees. Children chased one another through alleyways while bakers filled the air with the scent of warm bread. On such mornings, it was easy to forget that just beyond the city's pulse, behind the arches of the Colosseum, men and women died for applause. This was the morning when she arrived. She wore no chains. No guards escorted her. She simply walked down the Via Sacra, through the gates, and into the arena compound. Her feet were bare. Her cloak was coarse. Her hair hung in tangled braids, thick with dust and small beads carved from bone. She was neither young nor old, neither beautiful nor plain, and no one could agree on the color of her eyes. Some said blue, others green. A few swore they were gold. She gave no name, but the slaves began to call her Servido because of how silently she moved. She carried a bag. worn, stitched with pale thread, and tied at the top with dried reeds. No one knew what was inside. When asked her origin, she replied in perfect Latin, "From the place before names." The guards laughed, then tried to send her away, but she would not go. She stood at the arena gates for 2 days, unmoving, did not eat, did not sleep. On the 3rd day, a message arrived. It bore the imperial seal, a simple decree: let her enter. She has been seen. That was enough. She was given a cell, not in the hypogeum, but above, near the upper tiers. A place once used for musicians, long abandoned. She accepted it without expression. She spoke only when spoken to, and even then her answers came in riddles. When offered food, she divided it into 3 portions. One for herself, one for the rats that shared her space, and one left outside her door with a small stone placed on top. No one knew why. The guards began to avoid her, not out of fear, but unease. It was said she talked in her sleep, not in Latin, not in any known tongue. The words flowed like water, soft but ceaseless, lulling and strange. Then one morning, her name appeared on the match list, not written by hand, carved, etched into the wood of the board itself, deep and perfect, as though no blade had touched it. Just Serva! The opponent? Unclear. No name listed. Only a symbol, a circle, pierced by 2 diagonal lines. The scribes debated. No one recognized it. Not from any legion, not from any known order, but the date was marked. And so the crowd gathered. They came not for her, but for curiosity, to see what madness the games had conjured this time. At the center of the arena, Serva stood alone. She had brought her bag. She placed it gently at her feet. The gate opposite her opened, but no man entered. No beast, no sound, only silence. The crowd stirred, whispers rose. Then a figure emerged. Tall, not armored, not armed, draped in linen so dark it shimmered blue under the sun. A mask covered its face, smooth, featureless, polished like obsidian. It moved without sound. The crowd quieted. Serva bent down and opened her bag. From it, she removed 3 things: a wooden bowl, a string of dark beads, and a small flat mirror. She placed the bowl at her left, the beads at her right, and the mirror before her. Then she sat, cross-legged, waiting. The masked figure stopped 10 paces away, tilted its head as if listening. No weapons were drawn, no signal was given, but something had begun. The air changed. The wind that passed through the upper arches fell still. Dust rose in soft spirals, and in that hush, Serva began to speak. Not loud, not fast, a chant, each word like a thread pulling, unraveling. The masked figure took a step forward. The mirror on the ground flickered. A shadow passed across it, not from either of them. Serva's voice grew steadier. The figure paused. Then slowly, it knelt, faced her, hands resting on its knees. Stillness. 10 breaths passed. Then the mask cracked. A thin line starting from the chin, climbing diagonally to the forehead. The mask split, but instead of a face, there was only light, soft, pale, like moonlight on water. Serva did not look away. She whispered one final word, and the figure vanished. Not disappeared, vanished, as though it had never been there. Only the faint shimmer in the mirror remained. Then even that was gone. Serva gathered her items, placed them back into the bag, stood, bowed, and walked from the arena. The crowd, stunned, said nothing. No cheers, no cries, only breath held and then slowly released. The editors argued for days. Was it a match, a performance, a rite? The records were never settled, but the entry written in the official scroll, in the clean hand of the senior scribe, reads, "Combat refused, opponent unnamed, resolution unknown, result returned." And Serva? She remained in her cell for 7 more nights. On the 8th, she was gone. The door had not been opened. The locks remained sealed. Her mirror lay on the windowsill, catching the first light of dawn. In it, the guard who found it swore he saw his own face, but older and crying. They called it Ludus Minerva, the school of Minerva, though no wisdom ever truly lived within its walls. It was the smallest of the gladiator schools, an afterthought tucked between a broken aqueduct and a row of weavers' shops. Its gates were crooked, its sand always damp, and the training field barely large enough for 3 men to spar without stepping on each other's shadows. It was here that they brought the ones no one else wanted. Too weak, too sick, too slow, too strange. And among them, there was one boy who never trained. His name was Telon. He arrived without ceremony, a thin, hollow thing, limbs like twigs, eyes too large for his face, hair the color of river clay. His left foot dragged slightly when he walked, but he never stumbled. He was no older than 13, no family, no crime, No sentence, simply placed. The Lanista had protested, said the boy wouldn't last a week, said he would waste food, said he would bring down morale. But the magistrate had waved a hand and spoken a phrase that silenced even the Lanista's tongue. He is already paid for. So Telon stayed. He did not speak for the first month, not a word. But each morning, he would wake before the others, carry a bucket to the edge of the practice yard, and water the dust. Not enough to soak it, just enough to keep it from blowing into the wind. Each night, he would sleep beneath the awning instead of in the barracks, staring up at the stars as if waiting for one of them to blink back. He was not mocked, not because he inspired fear, but because he inspired unease. One day, a fighter named Mirko, tired of the boy's silence, threw a scrap of meat at him during meal hours. It struck Telon's shoulder. He did not flinch. He turned, looked at Mirko, just once, and Mirko's hand began to bleed. No cut, no wound, just blood leaking from the palm as though from nowhere. He screamed. It didn't stop until Telon turned away. After that, no one touched him. Still, he never lifted a weapon, never trained, until the day of the fire match. The fire match was not scheduled, it was not sanctioned, it was not legal, but it happened. Each year during the coldest week of winter, the underground gamblers of Rome staged one match in secret. No records, no rules, only fire. A ring of it lit with oil and pitch encircling two fighters. The only way out was over the flames or through your opponent. The prize was freedom, or at least the idea of it. That year, one of the fighters fell ill the night before, could not stand. The organizers panicked. They needed a replacement, and Telon was offered. The Lanista laughed, but again, the phrase returned. He is already paid for. That night, they took him. He said nothing, walked calmly, and when the flames were lit and the ring of fire danced like teeth in the dark, Telon stood barefoot on the scorched earth. Across from him stood a seasoned killer, a man called Vitrix. 30 wins, no defeats. His body was a mural of scars and ink. He grinned when he saw the boy, raised his weapon, a massive hammer forged from iron and time. The crowd was loud, hungry. The match began. Vitrix lunged. Telon did not move. The hammer fell, hard and fast, striking the earth beside him. Sand exploded, smoke curled, but Telon remained. Vitrix snarled, swung again, this time higher, toward the boy's chest. Telon raised a single hand, palm open, and the hammer stopped, not slowed, stopped, midair, as though caught by something invisible. Vitrix screamed, pulled, roared. The hammer would not move. Telon stepped forward, placed one finger on Vitrix's forehead, and whispered something. No one heard it, but Vitrix dropped the hammer, fell to his knees, then onto his side, unmoving, still alive, but changed. His eyes wide, his breathing shallow, his limbs twitching like a child's in fevered sleep. The flames died down. The crowd said nothing. Telon turned and walked through the smoke. The organizers vanished by morning. The ring was dismantled, no records kept. But word traveled, and soon Telon was moved. No longer kept at Ludus Minerva. He was relocated quietly to the Colosseum itself. But not as a fighter, not as a prisoner, not even as a curiosity. He was placed in a chamber near the heart of the structure. A room that had once held scrolls, then bones, then nothing. Now it held Telon. Each week someone came to visit. Never the same person twice. One brought fruit, one brought a dove, one brought a book written in a language no one could read. Each left in silence. Each looked paler when they returned to the world above. Telon never left his room, but sometimes at dusk, shadows gathered near his door in strange shapes. Not human, not quite. The guards were told not to look, not to knock, just to listen. And if they ever heard a humming sound from within, they were to leave immediately. Years passed, but Telon remained, never aging, never speaking, just watching. And the dust outside his door, it never gathered. It stayed wet, as if someone still rose each morning to water it. The 13th tale begins not in shadow, but in song. On the edge of the Aventine Hill, where the temples were fewer and the cypress trees leaned like old men whispering to each other, there was a garden, overgrown, half forgotten, its fountain dry, its paths cracked. Yet, in the early hours before dawn, a voice could sometimes be heard there, high and clear, singing a melody no Roman had composed. The voice belonged to Neva. No one knew her origin, only that she had once belonged to the household of a senator who died suddenly, choking on a pomegranate seed. After his death, his estate was sold, his slaves dispersed, and Neva, neither registered as citizen nor property, simply disappeared. Until she reappeared at the gates of the Colosseum. She was dressed in white linen, her hands stained with blue dye, and her eyes clouded with something that was not blindness, but not quite sight either. When the guards questioned her, she answered with a question of her own. "What will you do when the lions begin to weep?" The guards laughed, then hesitated. There was something about her voice, not the words, but the sound. It made the air feel thick, made the torch flames flicker. They detained her, reported her. She was passed from official to official like a misplaced object. She offered no resistance, only silence. And sometimes when left alone, she would hum. The magistrates, unsure of how to categorize her, eventually assigned her as arena prophetess, a novelty meant to recite omens or sing preludes before particularly bloody events. It was a gimmick, nothing more. But then the first match began. She was led onto the sands with a flute carved from ivory. Her arms were bare, her feet dusted with chalk. She bowed to the emperor's box, though he had not yet arrived, and sat on a low stool at the eastern edge of the arena. She played, not a melody of triumph, not a march, but something older, something slow, circular, sad. The crowd murmured, then quieted. Even the vendors stopped calling. When the gates opened and the first beast was released, a lion from Mauritania, starved for 3 days, it did not roar. It walked, paws slow, tail low, as though confused by the silence. The fighter entered behind it, shield raised, sword gleaming. The lion turned to face him and sat down, its head lowered. It did not attack, it did not move. It simply waited. The fighter, unsure, looked to the editor's box. The signal was given, kill, but the sword would not land. The lion's eyes, wide, golden, locked with the man's. He dropped the weapon, fell to his knees, whispered something into the air. Later, no one could agree on what he'd said. Some claimed it was a prayer, others said it was a name. But all agreed on what happened next. He wept uncontrollably, sobbing, shaking, as though remembering something he had never known. And the lion? It approached him, nuzzled its face against his chest. The crowd did not cheer. They left, quietly, as if stepping out of a temple. Neva was not punished nor praised. She was simply kept. She did not perform every day, only on certain mornings, only when she chose. Each time she sang or played, something changed. A fighter would refuse to strike. A tiger would claw at the walls, but not the man in front of it. Once, an entire match ended with both opponents lying on their backs, laughing like children. The editors were furious, but the emperor, an old man then, growing tired of carnage, allowed it. He called her Belua Muta, the beast that silences beasts. No scroll recorded her victories, but each time she played, fewer people died. Until one day, she vanished. Not into shadow, not into exile. She simply walked into the arena at dawn, sat on her stool, and played her flute. A song softer than the others. No match followed. No audience entered. And when the sun rose high and the guards came to call her in, she was gone. Only the flute remained, resting in the sand, still warm. For years afterward, on certain misty mornings, stable boys and gatekeepers claimed they heard music in the corridors. Not loud, not clear, but enough to make a horse pause, or a prisoner close his eyes. And sometimes the lions, caged and restless, would grow still, tilt their heads, as though listening to something only they could understand. And maybe they did. Winter in Rome was never quiet, only slower. The wheels of carts turned with more resistance. The laughter of taverns was muffled behind thick curtains, and the bells of the forum rang as if through wool. The Colosseum, however, never slowed. Even as frost bit the air and cloaks wrapped tighter, the games pressed on. And it was in this cold that the man named Luthor arrived. Not dragged, not chained. He came on foot, alone, wrapped in a thick mantle stitched with faded insignia, an eagle barely visible beneath the dust and time. He was broad-shouldered, gray-bearded, and walked with the deliberate gait of a man who had spent much of his life under heavy armor. The guards stopped him at the entrance. He held out a scroll. It bore no seal, no signature, just a line written in firm, deliberate hand. "I request a reckoning." They laughed, until they looked into his eyes that did not plead, did not waver, only waited. The scroll was passed upward, first to the quartermaster, then the magistrates, then quietly to the emperor himself. A meeting was arranged, not in public, not in court, just a quiet conversation in the marbled shadows of the Palatine, where the emperor listened, and afterward nodded once, That was all. Luthor was given a chamber in the southern barracks. Unlike other fighters, he asked for nothing. No sword, no armor, no food prepared to his liking. He spent most of his time sitting in the courtyard, hands resting on his knees, face tilted toward the sun like a man trying to feel something he had forgotten. Some recognized him. Whispers began. He had once been a primus pilus, the highest-ranking centurion of a Roman legion, decorated, praised, a tactician, a hero. Until the Dacian campaign, until the village, no record survived of what had happened there. Only that a unit under his command had slaughtered more than fighters, more than rebels. They had gone too far, and Luthor had disappeared soon after. Now, years later, he had returned, not to clear his name, but to offer it. His match was not announced. No fanfare, no listing on the public boards, just a quiet scheduling on a gray afternoon slotted between two routine events. Many in the audience didn't even notice his entrance. He wore a simple tunic, carried a gladius, standard issue, no crest on his helmet. Across from him was a man named Rallus, young, fast, loud. Rallus had climbed quickly in the arena, favored by crowds for his flair, his bravado. He twirled his sword as he entered, saluted the Emperor with a grin, and winked at the front rows. Then he saw Luthor, and the grin faded, the trumpet sounded. They circled. Rallus struck first, quick, calculated, trying to test. Luthor parried, barely moved. But the sound of steel against steel rang out like a verdict. Rallus struck again, faster. Luthor blocked, stepped aside, spoke a single word. Again, Rallus hesitated, then obeyed. Another attack, another parry. This time, Luthor countered, lightly tapping the flat of his blade against Rallus's ribs. No cut, just contact. Again, he said. Rallus attacked twice more. Each time, Luthor parried, redirected, spoke the word. Again. It went on like this for nearly 10 minutes. The crowd grew restless, but some watched with fascination. This was no fight. It was a lesson. Then Luthor disarmed him, a single, fluid motion. The sword clattered to the ground. Rallus stood, breathing hard, chest rising and falling. Luthor looked at the editor's box, raised his sword, not to kill, but to offer it. The editor hesitated, then gave the signal, spare. The crowd clapped, not with thunder, but with something close to respect. Luthor bowed, but he did not leave. He turned to face the Emperor, removed his helmet, and said, "That is one. There are 6. The Emperor, pale beneath his wreath, said nothing, but the message was understood. Over the next 6 days, Luthor fought 6 more matches, each one against a man who had once served under him. Men who had vanished after the Dacian campaign, men whose names had been quietly reassigned, records scrubbed, given new identities in the arena. Each match was deliberate, precise, not vengeful, but inevitable. He spared 2, killed 3, and the sixth was himself. On the final day, no opponent was scheduled. The arena staff were confused. The match list showed only Luthor versus Luthor. He entered alone. No sword, no shield. He knelt in the center of the arena and drew a dagger from within his tunic. Not arena issue. Older, worn. The kind carried by officers who had seen too much. He pressed it to his chest, looked to the Emperor, and waited. The Emperor stood, removed his laurel, and turned away. Luthor drove the blade inward, not with fury, but with finality, as though placing a stone where it belonged. The crowd did not cheer. They stood quietly, some not understanding, some understanding too well. His body was buried beneath the arena, but not among the criminals, not among the animals. In a chamber lined with salt and oil and silence, and carved above his resting place in unadorned Latin, one by one. The reckoning, it seemed, was not about vengeance, it was about completion. By the time the 15th tale begins, the Colosseum had already begun to crack. Not visibly, not to the crowds that still poured in each week, their hands sticky with dates and their robes stained with dust. But in its bones, in the slow erosion of certainty, in the uneasy silences between cheers, in the quiet glances shared by those who had seen too many matches end without explanation. And then came the boy who drew with ash. He appeared one morning just outside the Colosseum's northern gate, curled like a comma in the corner of the wall, clutching a small cloth bag. The guards almost stepped over him. He did not cry. He did not beg. He only opened the bag and with his fingers began to draw. Straight onto the stone. The ash came from burnt olive twigs, later found near the Temple of Vesta. The drawings? Symbols, loops, patterns. Some geometric, some like broken letters, some like the eyes of animals. No one could understand them. At first, they tried to wash the markings away, but each time they returned, darker than before. The guards kicked over the bag. The boy blinked once, then continued drawing. A report was filed, then ignored. He was left alone for a while, until the games began. That day, the crowd gathered early. The heat was sharp. Shadows pooled like ink under the stone seats. A popular fighter, Flavius the Red Wolf, was set to face a Nubian net fighter named Simo. Both had seen blood, both had drawn praise. But as the gates opened and the fighters stepped into the light, something unexpected happened. Flavius stopped, looked down, then stumbled back. Etched into the sand at the center of the arena was a symbol, a perfect circle, encasing 3 triangles that pointed inward, drawn not with a staff or blade, but with ash. The guards had not noticed it, the editors had not ordered it, but there it was. And Flavius, normally arrogant, steady, sure, refused to fight. He stared at the mark, then dropped his sword. Simo, confused, approached, then froze. Both men looked at each other, then at the stands, and without a word turned and walked back through the gates. The crowd erupted in anger. The match was called null. The arena buzzed with confusion. The mark was brushed away, but by morning it had returned, and the boy was still outside, drawing. He did not sleep. He did not eat. He simply traced symbols, new ones, each day. Some mirrored ancient Etruscan characters. Some resembled constellations. One scribe swore that he saw his own name in one of the patterns, though no letters matched. Then one morning, the emperor's name appeared, not written, implied. A crown of lines, a throne of bones, a sun bleeding through bars. It was subtle but clear. The boy was taken into custody, dragged below. But he did not struggle. When they opened his hand, it was full of ash, and when they tried to bind him, the rope slid loose. They kept him in the hypogeum, watched by 3 guards at all times. The next morning, one of those guards was gone, vanished, no trace. In his place, a drawing on the stone wall, a spiral made of hands. The boy never explained, never spoke, until the 7th day. A priest was brought in. Not one of the official temple cults, but an old man from the hills, one of those kept for omens and oddities. He entered the chamber. The boy looked up and whispered, "The arena is dreaming." The priest asked what it dreamed of. The boy answered, "Balance and the weight of too much noise." Then closed his eyes and died. No wound, no illness. His heart simply stopped. The priest wept, said nothing more. The boy was cremated that night, but the ash from his body refused to blow away. It clung to the windless air, drifted through the halls of the Colosseum, settled in corners and seams. And in the days that followed, fighters began to speak of strange dreams, not of victory, not of glory, but of silence, deep, impossible silence, as if the stones themselves had begun to listen. And remember, by the 16th tale, the Colosseum had begun to feel heavy, not in the stone, not in its towering arches or the load of its gates, but in the air itself, a pressure that lingered in the lungs of those who spent too long within its walls. Veterans of the arena said they could feel it behind their eyes, just before a match, like a tide waiting to pull. It was during such a season that the records show the return of a man thought long dead. His name was Corian. Years before, Corian had been a minor gladiator, not brilliant, not beloved, but consistent. His record, 5 wins, 2 losses, 1 draw. No one remembered his face, not really. Just the way he held his shield slightly too low, as if listening to the earth through it. Then came the match against the Scythian, a brutal fighter, long spear, fast strikes. Corian never stood a chance. The reports claimed he died before he hit the sand. Spear through the lung. His body was carried away, the gate dragged shut behind him. But no funeral was held, no burial record filed. And now, 5 years later, he was back. The lanista who spotted him didn't believe it at first. The man wore a cloak soaked from the rain, his beard grown wild, a line of faded scar running from brow to cheek like an unfinished thought. He said his name was Corian, and that he had come to fight again. The officials checked the records. The name was there, stamped and sealed, dead. Yet here he stood. They asked where he had been. He answered, "In the place they keep the unfinished." No one knew what that meant, but the Colosseum accepted him. Of course it did. His match was set for the following week. A simple duel, no animals, no ceremony. His opponent, Draenus, young and fast, with a taste for mockery. As they entered the arena, the sky darkened, though no clouds had gathered. The light seemed to withdraw from the edges of things, not into night, but into gray. Corian stood still. His shield was smaller now, his gladius dull. Draenus, laughing, circled him, taunted, then charged. The blade arced, beautiful, practiced. Corian raised his shield, but not to block, to listen, and then moved. Not quickly, not with grace, but precisely. The blade missed. Corian struck, a short jab, nothing grand. Draenus gasped, collapsed. No wound could be found. But his eyes stared into something far away. Corian stood over him and said, "Not done," then walked away. The crowd erupted, confused, loud. But Corian did not raise his hand. He returned to the barracks. Over the next month, he fought 4 more times. Each opponent was someone from his past, old rivals, survivors of his old training cohort, men who years ago had watched him fall. One by one, they met him in the arena, and one by one, they left changed, not dead, but fractured. The last match was different. No name listed for the opponent, only a time, sunset, only a location. The Cella Umbra, the shadow cell beneath the Colosseum, rarely used since the early days. No audience permitted, no record made. Corian entered alone. What happened there is unknown, but that night the guards heard a sound, a metal clang, followed by a whisper, and then silence. When they opened the gate, they found Corian seated on the floor, bloodless, eyes closed. Again. This time there was a burial, a small chamber cut into the lower levels of the arena. His shield hung above the stone, but no name was carved, only a phrase, "He was not finished." And for years after, on certain evenings when the sun dipped low and shadows grew long, some fighters claimed they could hear the faint sound of breathing behind the gates of the Cella Umbra. Not heavy, not human, but steady, like someone listening. They came before dawn, not soldiers, not slaves, not even staff, just 3 figures in dark gray cloaks, hoods drawn low, each leading a mule cart bearing a long, heavy crate wrapped in oiled cloth. They arrived without announcement, spoke to no one, did not wait for permission. They passed through the eastern gate of the Colosseum as if they belonged, and perhaps they did. The guards, though confused, felt no impulse to stop them. The sun had not yet risen when the crates were lowered into the hypogeum. No names were given, no instructions issued, but within hours the crates were gone. No one saw them opened. No one saw what was inside, only that afterwards something began to change. It started with the air, a smell, not rot, not sulfur, but salt. Thick, damp, like sea fog caught in stone. Then came the dreams. Fighters who slept near the lower cells began waking in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, eyes wide with confusion. When asked what they saw, none could explain. One whispered, "I dreamt of drowning, but the water was made of voices." Another said, "The sand had hands." On the 3rd night, the matches resumed. The crowd, as always, arrived in waves. Robed senators, perfumed matrons, shrieking vendors, drunk soldiers. They came expecting spectacle. They got silence. The first fighter walked into the arena, a Thracian with braided hair, broad shoulders, and a reputation for flair. He waved to the crowd. No one emerged from the other gate. Instead, the ground shifted. Right at the center of the arena, a low groan of stone grinding against stone. Then something rose. A door, circular, seamless, it's coated in iron that shimmered black. It slid open without a sound. And from it came a figure, not armored, not robed, wrapped in strips of linen soaked in pitch, as if mummified in haste. Its face covered, its hands gloved. But it moved with perfect balance. The crowd leaned forward. The Thracian paused, raised his blade, then lowered it. Something in him knew. This was not an opponent, it was a sentence. The figure walked slowly, deliberately. The match had begun, but there was no signal, no trumpet, no cheer. The fighter moved first, swinging with trained precision. He aimed for the figure's midsection. The blade struck and passed through without tearing, as if the linen were made of smoke. He stepped back. The figure stepped forward and placed a hand over the fighter's face. No pressure, no violence, just contact. The Thracian collapsed, not dead, but unmoving, as if sleep had claimed him too quickly. The figure turned, walked back to the opening in the sand, and disappeared beneath it. The door closed, perfectly, seamlessly. The crowd did not cheer. They left in silence. Over the next week, it happened again. Each day, a different fighter, a different crowd, always the same. The linen-wrapped figure emerging, making contact, and the opponent falling as if into a void. No blood, no violence, only ending. The editors tried to intervene. They removed the name from the match lists. They assigned alternate fights. But each morning, the circular door appeared. whether scheduled or not. The arena grew quieter, the vendors shouted less, the musicians played softer, and the audience no longer came for victory. They came to witness the moment just before surrender. Then one day, the figure did not return. The circular door opened, but nothing rose. The sand remained untouched. That day, a new inscription was found near the old archway beneath the hypogeum, burned into the stone, not carved. A message in perfect Latin: those who are forgotten still remember. The officials searched for the three cloaked figures. None were found. The carts had vanished, and though the smell of salt faded, the dreams remained. Fighters began to tie cloth over their faces at night, hoping to block the dreams. It didn't help. The door beneath the sand never opened again. But some mornings, if the light was just right, a faint ring could be seen at the center of the arena. Not carved, not raised, just present. A memory beneath the dust. Waiting. It began with birds. Not the ones trained for message or song, those white doves and clever ravens kept by senators in gilded cages. These were common birds, street birds, dust-colored, sharp-beaked, the kind that gathered crumbs between columns and fluttered along the gutters of the forum. They stopped flying near the Colosseum. At first, no one noticed. Then a few of the grain vendors complained. Their usual flocks weren't scavenging. Their bags remained full longer than expected. A good omen, perhaps, some said. Less filth. But then the silence deepened. The pigeons did not coo. The swifts did not circle the upper arches. And one morning, a child pointed to a row of birds perched on the arena's outer ledge. Dead. All of them. Upright. Still, eyes open, as if listening to something that no one else could hear. The bodies were removed quickly, burned without ceremony. The games continued. That day, a match was held between two champions, Dacius the Tall, known for his ferocity, and Manius of the Veil, famed for his technique and mercy, a rare pairing of equal skill. The crowd buzzed with excitement, but the match never started. As both men entered the arena, something strange happened. Not with the fighters, with the sand. It moved. Not from wind. There was none. It rippled, just slightly, like water stirred by a breath. Both men paused. The crowd quieted. Then, from beneath the sand, something began to emerge. Not quickly, not dramatically. A line. Just a single line of dark, dry earth, rising like a scar across the pale floor of the arena. Then another, intersecting the first, then a third, forming a shape, an angular triangle pointing east, sharp and deliberate. No one had drawn it. No gate had opened. No staff were involved. The fighters stepped back, and as they did, the ground around the triangle darkened. Not in color, in silence. Sound itself seemed to bend around it. When Dacius lifted his sword, it rang, but the sound didn't echo. It was swallowed, like the air had become too thick for noise to travel. Manius dropped to one knee. He whispered, not to the gods, but to the earth. Who draws this? No one answered. But from within the triangle, something shimmered. A distortion, a heatless flicker, like sunlight bending behind clear water. And then a figure appeared, but only barely. Just the outline, no detail, no color, as if someone had drawn the idea of a person in smoke and let the lines blur. It stood at the triangle's center, motionless. Both fighters dropped their weapons, not in fear, in reverence, and the figure raised a single arm, pointed, not at them, at the Emperor's box, at the highest seat in the amphitheater. Then it vanished. The triangle collapsed, the sand fell flat, and the sound returned. Birds suddenly screamed in the distance, circling high overhead as if something had released them from a spell. The crowd rose. Some gasped, some crossed themselves, some simply left. No official record was made of the event, but the fighters never returned. They left Rome entirely. One became a hermit on the coast of Sicily. The other took a vow of silence and lived among the gardeners of the Aventine. The emperor, old, cautious, rarely moved by omens, ordered the center of the arena to be repacked. The sand was dug out, sifted, replaced with stone-dusted gravel from the Alban hills. But the triangle came back, not always visible, but always. There, just faint enough to be ignored, just clear enough to be remembered. And on certain mornings when the mist rolled in from the east and settled like breath over the stones, the shape could be seen again, waiting, pointing. Part 19 began with the sound of a heartbeat. Not metaphorically, not in the chest of a man pacing behind the arena gate, nor in the tremble of a young recruit waiting his turn in the sands. This heartbeat came from beneath the Colosseum itself, from the stone. At first, no one believed it. A foolish story passed from the mouths of oil lamp guards with too many night shifts, too little wine, and too much imagination. But then more heard it. Those working below the arena floor, stage operators, animal keepers, grain sweepers, all claimed to feel a steady rhythmic thump through the soles of their feet, faint but unmistakable, not always loud, but always there, every 23 seconds, measured, relentless, a pulse. The physicians were summoned. They declared it an acoustic trick, a side effect of distant construction, of subterranean aqueduct shifting, of natural earth settling. But the sound didn't match any known pattern, and it only occurred beneath the Colosseum, nowhere else, and never when crowds were present, only in the quiet, only in the dark. Soon after, an architect named Fabius was ordered to investigate. He had studied the foundations of the Flavian amphitheater for years, drawn cross-sections of its secret vaults, traced its rainwater channels, even mapped forgotten corridors where the dead were once stored. He welcomed the assignment. He descended with 5 men. Only one returned, and he would never speak again, not one word. He lived the rest of his life scribbling fragments on the walls of his small room near the Quirinal Hill. Most were meaningless, but one phrase repeated over and over, hundreds of times. "It is not stone." The emperor refused to acknowledge the incident. Instead, he ordered a new set of games, larger, grander, louder. Noise, he believed, would mask whatever mystery lived below. But the heartbeat continued. And then the doors arrived. Not built, not constructed, discovered. They were found behind a crumbling wall during routine maintenance. Tall, seamless slabs of black granite buried 20 feet below the western gate. They had no handles, no hinges, no markings, but they radiated cold even in the height of summer. The workers who touched them grew ill. First with fever, then silence, then absence. Not death, absence. They remained in their beds. They breathed, they ate, but they no longer looked at anyone. Their eyes stayed fixed on some point no one else could see. Eventually, the doors were sealed behind a fresh wall of mortar and stone. But the heartbeat grew louder, and so the arena continued. Until a match was scheduled, one cloudy afternoon meant to feature a famed retiarius and a condemned senator fallen from favor. The crowd arrived in full force. The musicians played, the trumpets sounded, the gates opened, but instead of 2 fighters, only one entered. A girl, no older than 8, barefoot, dressed in a linen shift, eyes half-lidded as though just woken from sleep. The crowd went silent, no one spoke. No orders had been given, no record showed her name. She walked to the center of the arena and knelt, placed one hand flat upon the sand and said, "It dreams of being more." Then the ground trembled, not a quake, not a crack, but a breath. A long inhale from below, and the sound, the heartbeat, rushed up through the floor, louder than ever, so loud that some in the stands dropped their cups, clutched their chests, thought it was their own bodies betraying them. The girl stood, the sand beneath her darkened, and when the guards rushed forward, she looked at them, not in fear, not in defiance, but in recognition, as if she had seen them before, or would see them again. They led her away. She did not resist. She was never seen again. No one knew her name. Only that from that day forward, the heartbeat stopped, vanished, gone. The corridors beneath the arena felt still. The stone cooled. The triangle never returned. But something else did. Silence, a new kind. Not the quiet of absence, but of waiting, of stillness after a breath has been held when even the walls remember. And though the Colosseum filled once again with the cries of crowds and the clash of steel, there was always, in the pauses between sounds, a soft echo behind it all, as if the arena itself were listening for the next word. By the time the 20th tale unfolded, the arena had already changed in ways no one could admit. Not publicly, not in the records, but behind closed doors, in the quiet corners of corridors where guards met and whispered without lanterns, the truth was forming like mist. The Colosseum was no longer merely a place of blood. It was remembering. And one morning, it answered. That morning began with the absence of shadow. The sun had risen, the sky was clear. And yet, for reasons no priest could explain and no augur dared predict, the arena floor cast no shadows. The fighters stood, the columns loomed, the flags rippled, and yet everything was lit flatly, evenly, as if the light came from nowhere at all. The crowd grew restless. Some blamed the hour, others a trick of weather. But there was no cloud, no storm. just the strange, soft brightness that coated the sand like dust. Then came the sound, not the heartbeat, a voice, low, hollow, as if spoken from within the walls themselves. It said just one word. No trumpet blew, no gate opened, yet everyone heard it. Name. The word drifted through the amphitheater like smoke, unplaceable in direction, impossible to ignore. No one moved. Then, without announcement, a man stepped into the arena. He had not been scheduled. His name was not on any list. He wore the uniform of a Roman legionary, but faded, outdated, a pattern from 2 generations before. His face was clean-shaven, gaunt, his eyes unfocused, as if pulled from a long dream. On his shoulder was a patch of dried wax, the remains of a seal burned away. He walked to the center of the arena, knelt, and spoke his name. Cassian. The name was old, very old. Somewhere in a scroll forgotten at the bottom of an archive, the name had once been scratched into the death records of public execution. A boy, a dagger, a mismatched fight. He had not been meant to survive, but now, here he was, or something wearing his face. No one moved. Then another gate opened, not with machinery, not with guards. It simply yawned, and from it came another figure, this one armored, tall, familiar, an older gladiator named Valgus, long presumed dead. The crowd erupted in a gasp. Some had cheered his name decades ago. Others had heard the stories, the net fighter who died standing, who refused to kill. He walked with purpose, but not towards Cassian. He circled, then stopped. Their eyes met, and for a moment the entire Colosseum fell into a deeper silence than it had ever known. Then Cassian stood, not fast, not angry, as if finishing a movement interrupted long ago. Valgus raised his trident. Cassian raised nothing, but this time he did not tremble. He stepped forward. Valgus hesitated, then lowered his weapon, knelt before Cassian. The crowd gasped again. The voice returned, softer now. Remember, and the sand beneath their feet shifted. A shape emerged, just briefly, a single feather drawn in dust, then gone. The 2 men remained kneeling, and then both vanished. Not in a blink, not in light. They faded like heat from stone, slowly. The crowd sat in stunned silence. No record of the event was made. The magistrates refused to acknowledge it. The priests declared it theatrical heresy. But the vendors stopped selling bread near the eastern arch, and the guards began to avoid the corridor where Cassian's name was once carved. For those who had seen the match, if it could be called one, it was not a return. It was a closing, a wound stitched at last. And after that day, a strange softness settled over the arena. For weeks, no one died. Fighters spared each other without knowing why. Animals refused to strike. It was as though something deep beneath the Colosseum had exhaled for the first time in centuries. A breath held too long, finally released. And some say that if you visit the arena now at dusk and stand in the very center, you will cast no shadow. By the time the 21st tale drifted into being, the Colosseum had begun to whisper, not in words, in patterns, in echoes that did not quite belong to any single sound, in flickers of torchlight that danced in rhythms too deliberate for chance. The arena was listening, but it was also speaking. Only not everyone knew how to hear it. Then came the twins. Not the mirrored pair of warriors from before, but something stranger. They were not born together. They did not share blood. One was born in the hills of Etruria, beneath a crooked pine that never bore fruit. The other in a coastal village swallowed by the sea. They did not meet until they were 10, in chains, brought together in the bowels of a transport galley that fed Rome's endless appetite for bodies. They were never separated again. The record keepers marked them as Alias and Noctis, but they never used those names. To each other, they were always simply you. One fought, the other did not. One spoke, the other stayed silent. They were assigned to different schools, but they refused to function apart. When punished, they refused food. When beaten, they bore it in perfect rhythm, never crying out. When shackled, they managed to swap places overnight without keys, without tools. Eventually, the arena accepted the truth. They would not fight without each other. And so the editors, sensing novelty, saw an opportunity. Twins again, but this time not mirror and mirror. This time, opposite and vessel. The match was scheduled for the day of Mars, a day of fire and blood. They were to face a beast, a rhinoceros imported at ruinous cost from the southern deserts. Massive, irate, starved. The crowd was eager. The animal had never been defeated in prior appearances. It gored its last opponent with a single movement, splitting man from spine. When the gate opened and the beast charged into the arena, the audience roared with anticipation. Then the twins stepped into view. Alias wore armor, light, leather strap with a short sword at his side. Noctis wore nothing but a linen wrap. Bare-chested, eyes lowered, the contrast startled the crowd. One ready, one exposed, one prepared to fight, the other simply there. The beast saw them, snorted, charged, and at the last moment, Alias stepped aside. Not far, just enough. Noctis remained still. The rhinoceros skidded, corrected its course, charged again, and again. Each time, Alias moved just enough. Each time, Noctis remained. Then the strange thing happened. The beast slowed, not from fatigue, but confusion. It circled Noctis, huffing, stamping, but never striking. The crowd went quiet. Noctis looked up, and in that moment, something inside the animal shifted. It turned and lay down beside him, breathing hard, as if obeying, as if remembering. Alias approached, stroked the beast's side, raised his sword, then dropped it. The match was over. The editors hesitated. There was no precedent. The crowd, confused, began to clap, then louder and louder, until even the emperor seated above gave the faintest nod. The twins were declared victors, but they did not return to the barracks. Instead, they were escorted below, to a place beneath the hypogeum that had not been opened in years. A corridor lined with old altars, burnt-out incense, and a stone door. It opened without force. They stepped inside, and were not seen again. The room, when sealed behind them, grew colder than stone should be. Not hostile, not cursed, just still. And from then on, animals brought to the Colosseum grew restless when passing near that door. Some refused to enter the arena at all. Others lay down and would not rise. And fighters who passed too close said they could hear something on the other side. Not voices, but breath. Two of them, in perfect rhythm. One calm, one waiting. By the 22nd tale, the sand of the arena no longer behaved as it once had. It shifted in unfamiliar ways. Not with wind, not with the shuffle of sandals or the drag of weapons, but with intention. Some said it pulsed beneath their feet during combat. Others swore it responded to blood, not absorbing it, but reacting. As if the arena itself were developing a memory, grain by grain. And then one morning, someone tried to rewrite it. His name was Calixtus, a scholar, once a priest, long excommunicated. Once a favored voice of the Temple of Saturn, he had preached balance between offering and blood, between spectacle and silence. But he had grown obsessive, began collecting fragments from beneath the amphitheater, pieces of bone, globs of hardened pitch, ancient carvings pulled from the lowest tunnels. He called it the original script. He believed the Colosseum was not merely a structure for violence, but a conduit, a gate, and that each scream, each drop of blood was a syllable, part of a language older than Latin, older than empire, a language not read, but felt, written not on scrolls, but on flesh and stone. He disappeared for a decade and returned with something he called the counterspell. It was not magic, he claimed. It was architecture. He arrived wearing a robe of interwoven vellum strips, each inked with symbols of his own design. He did not knock on the Colosseum's gate. He walked in at twilight and knelt in the center of the arena, unarmed. The guards drew blades, but something in his presence stalled them. Not fear, not awe, but a peculiar calm. Calixtus began to speak, not loudly, not to the crowd, not to the emperor, to the ground. Each word deliberate, each phrase punctuated by a pause in which even the birds grew silent. Around him, the sand began to shift. Spirals, lines, arcs, no hand moved them. They drew themselves. The patterns curled outward from where he sat, marking the floor with symbols that no one recognized, but that all instinctively respected. Old, geometric, almost musical in their arrangement. Then the voices began, not from him, from beneath. Low at first, then rising, not in anger, not in pain, but in curiosity. A choir of tones from the stone itself, as though something far beneath had leaned close to listen. The crowd, those who had lingered past sunset, stood in hushed awe. Calixtus never stopped speaking, even when the first flame appeared, blue, cold, rising from the marks in the sand, flickering like breath. Then another and another, until the arena glowed. The emperor, watching from above, stood and raised his hand, but no order came, his throat locked. Calixtus looked up finally and said, "You built a mouth, I bring the tongue." Then came the collapse, not of stone, not of structure, but of memory. Those present forgot the hour, forgot the day. Some, the flames vanished. The marks blew away as if erased by a great sigh, and Calixtus was gone. No door had opened, no trap had sprung. He had simply ceased to be. But afterward, the Colosseum changed again. The sand refused to settle. No matter how many times it was packed, smoothed, watered, it shifted, subtly, deliberately. And in the upper tiers near the eastern stair, a new crack appeared in the marble. Thin, unremarkable, except that it hummed, only at dawn. Only for a moment, but always in the same key. A sound not unlike the last note of a lullaby remembered from childhood, echoing in the pause between sleep and waking. And those who studied the arena's foundations claimed that the lowest tunnels, ones sealed for centuries, had moved. Not crumbled, shifted, as though something down there had heard the words and responded. By the 23rd tale, even the scribes began to alter their ink. They wrote in darker strokes now, slower, more deliberate, as if the parchment itself demanded caution, as if the very act of recording what happened in the Colosseum had become dangerous, not because of political repercussions, but because the words might be heard, not by men, but by the stone. And yet, the games continued. The schedule, despite everything, pressed on. The citizens came. They filled the stands. Not all of them believed the stories. Many had heard whispers of the girl who vanished, the beast that knelt, the warriors who returned from death, the sand that remembered, but they brushed it off. Folk tales, drunken inventions, misunderstandings from the edge of sleep, until the man with no face arrived. He no name, not on paper, not in voice. He was brought in under the name Hostis Nullus, no enemy. He had no known crime, no sentence. He did not come from a province. He had not been purchased. The guards found him already inside the Colosseum one morning, standing near the center of the arena, wrapped in deep red cloth from head to toe. His face was covered by a featureless copper mask, polished to a dull shine. He said nothing. He moved only when moved. But when asked where he was from, he pointed downward, not south, not beneath his feet. Downward. The editors took it as a joke. They scheduled him to fight that week. The crowd loved it. His appearance, the mask, the mystery. There were bets on whether he would even lift a blade, on whether he was an escaped slave, a prophet, or some theatrical creation designed to lure in the superstitious. His first match was arranged against a beast, a black leopard from the southern mountains, known to be fast, vicious, and already responsible for the deaths of 2 handlers. The arena was filled before midday. The beast was released first. It charged instantly, sensing the tension, eyes fixed. Then the masked man stepped through the opposite gate. He carried no weapon, no shield, just the red cloth and the mask. The leopard stopped, not slowed, stopped. Its claws dragged faint lines through the sand, but it did not pounce. The crowd murmured. The animal circled, growled low. The masked man stood motionless. Then he raised his hand, and the leopard, without being struck, without being touched, collapsed. No wounds, no blood. Breathing, but still, the crowd was silent. A physician checked the animal, alive, unharmed, but in a deep, unreachable sleep. The editors were furious. They demanded another match. The next day, it was man versus man. A murmillo, seasoned, cruel, heavy sword, thick armor. The masked man appeared again, this time with a staff of dark wood, simple, unadorned. The fight began, but the murmillo could not strike. Every movement he made was mirrored in reverse, thrown off balance. He swung. The staff intercepted without sound. He stepped back. The staff was already there. It was not speed. It was anticipation, as if the masked man were watching 2 seconds ahead of the present. And then came the final moment. No blow was struck. No blood was spilled. The murmillo fell backward and said, "He is not watching me. He is watching the me that I might become." He refused to fight again, and the Colosseum grew uneasy. 3 more matches followed, all with the same result. Not death, not injury, but silence. Opponents collapsed, slept, froze, bowed. Each time, the masked man turned and walked back into the dark. Until the 7th day. He did not appear from the gates. He was simply already standing in the center of the arena when the crowd arrived. No one saw him enter. There was no scheduled match, no guards, no announcement, only him. And then the voice returned, the same one from weeks before, the one that had spoken a single word. This time, it said 2. It's listening. The crowd rose. Some screamed, some dropped to their knees. The ground trembled, not violently, but rhythmically, like breathing. The masked man raised his head, looked to the emperor's box. raised a single finger and pointed not at the emperor, not at any man, but at the stone wall behind him, the curve of the Colosseum, the shape that held them all. And then for the first time he spoke. His voice was thin, calm, as if spoken from a great distance. He said, "The mouth opens," and then he was gone. The red cloth fell to the ground. The mask clattered hollow and lay still. There was nothing beneath it, not blood, not bone, nothing. And beneath the Colosseum, somewhere in the corridors no longer mapped, a door, one that had no hinges and had never been opened, was found ajar. Just slightly, just enough for a sound to pass through. Not a growl, not a whisper, but a word, in a language that none understood, and all remembered. By the time the 24th tale unfolded, the Colosseum had grown quiet in a way that even silence could not explain. Not empty, not abandoned. It still breathed with footsteps, echoed with murmured prayers from those who cleaned its stones or sharpened the weapons of its remaining champions. But something had shifted beneath the surface, subtly, steadily, undeniably. There were fewer matches, fewer crowds, fewer reasons given. It was as if the city had agreed wordlessly to give the arena space, to let it rest. And yet on the last day of the festival month, one final match was scheduled. No names listed, no pairings announced, only a phrase carved, not written, into the arena's bronze gate. The arena remembers. No one knew who had etched it, no guard reported it, no stonecutter claimed it, but it was there, and once seen, it could not be unseen. That evening, as the sun slipped behind the hills and the marble columns of the Colosseum drank the last gold of daylight, the stands began to fill, slowly. Not with the same chaos or drunken laughter of past festivals. There were no vendors shouting, no fanfare, no street musicians plucking strings for coin, only people, sitting, waiting. They came in silence, wearing no color. They brought no banners, no bets, no offerings. And as twilight thickened into dusk, a strange thing happened. Every seat was filled. No invitations had been sent, no schedules announced, but they came. Old men who had once sold fruit near the gates, widows who had lost sons to the sword, children born on the day of previous games, now grown and whispering tales passed down like lullabies. They came without knowing why, as if drawn. And at the center of the arena floor, for the first time in living memory, no sand had been laid. The earth beneath was exposed, dark, compacted, stained by centuries, a bare circle of history uncovered. And then, without gate or horn, two figures stepped forward, not from opposite sides, but together. They entered from the western arch, walking side by side. One wore a faded tunic of undyed wool, barefoot, no weapon, a woman, perhaps 25. Her hair was tied in the simple knot of a farmhand. Her face was calm, her hands open. The other wore armor, old, dented, marked with dozens of seals from forgotten legions. A man, weathered but upright, bearing a long, curved blade slung across his back. His left arm was missing, his right eye sealed shut by an old burn. They stopped in the center, faced each other. The crowd held its breath, but no weapon was drawn. Instead, the man knelt, placed the blade gently on the earth. Then the woman knelt opposite him, pressed her hands to the soil, and whispered something none could hear. The ground trembled, lightly, almost lovingly. Then from the earth between them, something rose. Not a beast, not a god, not a ghost, but a memory. A form, fluid, flickering, woven of shadow and warmth. It changed as it moved. For some in the stands, it took the shape of a brother lost in war. For others, a lover who never returned. For one, a faceless fighter who once stood defiant and alone. The form moved between the two kneeling figures, then stopped. It turned toward the crowd and raised its hand. No sound came from its mouth, but the meaning was clear enough. Then it sank back into the earth. The man stood, the woman stood. Neither spoke. They turned and walked out the way they had come. The crowd did not cheer, they wept, softly, not from grief, but from release. And as the first stars appeared over the archways of Rome, the lights of the Colosseum were extinguished, not in fear, not in shame, but in reverence. The arena for that night and every night that followed remained empty, not abandoned, but fulfilled. The sand was never laid again, no match ever held. And those who pass by it now, centuries later, walking among the bones of empire, sometimes stop without knowing why. They pause, breathe, listen, and if the evening is quiet enough, they might hear it. Not a roar, not a cry, just a breath drawn in, then let go, like something ancient finally allowed to sleep.